Hey everybody, welcome to WordCast number 83. It's going to be a very big week this time, so I think we'll just kind of jump into it after Daniel introduces himself.
Well, you just introduced me, so we're good to go.
Okay, we're good to go. I always do that, and I don't do that intentionally. I don't be like Daniel introduce himself intentionally.
I don't believe you because it's too consistent at this point.
I just I don't think about anything.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so yeah, so here we've got 3090 reviews and news and pre-orders, and I'm probably gonna cry on stream. That'll be fun. We'll be ready for that.
We'll clip just that. We'll make it a TikTok, a bite, everything. You'll go viral, buddy.
It's gonna be our new logo.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be crying about not being able to buy a graphics card.
A $1,500 graphics card.
Yes,
Be
in
clear on that.
specific. Yeah, we got to be clear about that. So yeah, this was kind of weird. So it's an 8K gaming card according to Nvidia. Now to back up just a little bit, there was back when Jensen was announcing the 3090 and the 30 series and stuff, there was a lot of stuff that kind of proposed it as like a more of a production card. It wasn't it wasn't explicitly said because it's not a Titan, right? It is a 3000 series GeForce GPU, but there was no bullshit basically. And then after that, we had 8K gaming ads, literally. I like how you just called them ads. You didn't say kind of ads in here.
They were
They were
ads,
just ads.
just straight up. They
Yeah,
were paid
from
videos.
MKBHD and Linus, where they were calling it an 8K gaming card, and it was the first 8K gaming card, and it was the first footage of the 3090. And this was the night before the review embargo lifted and the card launched, right? They both demoed the card on a $30,000 TV, which is just hilarious.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, let's be real here. If you're buying a $30,000 TV and you want to play games on it, you're just going to buy 2 or 3 or 5 of these.
yeah, like it doesn't even matter at that point. Yeah, so now here's where it starts to get a little frustrating. Is that the first part of the review embargo lifted the same time the card launched, at the same time. And so in order for you to know if the card was good or not before purchasing, you had to have seen the review, but you couldn't do it because they sold out so quick, right?
Well, let's back up. Let's go back. So with these videos, I feel like there's a big problem where because these launched first, they were the only numbers that you had. And because they were
Yes.
using the games that Nvidia chose as most representative of 8K gaming, it made it seem like that was feasible, which means they must be good for everything else. Because like in MKBHD's video, Forza was doing 8K at almost 60. And in Linus's video, he used Doom, which, as Steve from Gamers Nexus points out, is a terrible example of showing if a graphics card is powerful because that game is so well optimized. It's going to run better than everything else.
Yeah, I mean it can run on a freaking toaster. Like that game
Yeah.
works on anything. And so it was like those were both misrepresentations, especially Doom because of how optimized it is. But then like especially we've seen with 20 series, Doom just like it just runs.
Yeah.
But then like Forza was a little bit better of an example, but the problem with that was it still did have a lot of dips down into the like high 30 low 40s range. Um and even then this whole campaign to try and sell this card to gamers is irritating on a card that's really better suited for production, and also trying to advertise it as something for displays that nobody can buy
Yeah.
is
And then
ridiculous.
I also wanted to talk about MKBHD doing this ad doesn't really bother me that much as he's not in that field.
Yeah,
I do kind of have a problem with Linus doing it,
I agree.
because people like, yeah, in his actual review, he did a good job of calling out some things that Nvidia did wrong. Like he did that. That's good.
Yeah,
It's not like it affected his review. But when you're a consumer who maybe doesn't follow this stuff super well, and you just see a video from Linus, yeah, sure, it's clearly a sponsored video, but that doesn't mean that you're gonna see him talking about how great it is at 8K gaming for Doom and think that he would be somewhat misleading you when in reality he was, because yeah, it
yeah.
was good in Doom, but that's not representative of most games.
Yeah, and like MKBHD is definitely a more generic tech channel where you don't go to his channel expecting detailed information on a video card. You do go to Linus for exactly that, for a detailed analysis and proper understanding of the tech that's, behind a video card or a CPU or a server even. And so it's a little bit frustrating seeing that from him.
Yeah,
Um
I almost feel like he should have, if he was going to take this ad, not done a review.
yeah.
Um, but personally, like I've had this issue with Linus and reviews where because he's so much more focused on being an entertainment channel,
Mhm.
even though his reviews generally don't have like issues, it's just like harder for me to take them seriously. It's
Yeah,
nothing
I think
against
so
him
too.
specifically, but it's like, I don't watch like John Oliver expecting actual news.
Yeah,
I
right.
watch it for the entertainment,
Yeah.
even though he does cover actual like news stories. And it's like, so when I go to watch Linus, at this point, he's so focused on the entertainment side of things that I'd rather just see reviews from someone else, especially with how detailed places like Gamers Nexus do their
Yeah.
reviews.
And I think I think to an extent, like I don't go to Linus for reviews anymore. I do go for the entertainment. They've definitely focused in that direction, and that's just kind of how I treat it. Although, it also seems like it's in some ways it's kind of category specific. Like I really trust the reviews on laptops, but I don't trust the reviews on graphics cards that much.
Mhm.
And so I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a weird
I mean,
position.
for me, it's not so much like an issue with like trusting the reviews. It's just like when I think of Linus, I think of an entertainment channel, not a review channel. And so
Right,
I don't really
right.
pay that much attention to his reviews because that's just not how I see his channel anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're right to feel that way. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's accurate. I guess is what I'm saying. So
yeah.
I don't know. It was weird, and before we jump into the performance numbers, I just want to say that Nvidia, you had to shoot yourselves in the foot the night before the launch. Not only with
Mhm.
this, like you started pushing this card that is a fantastic card for workstations. It's a fantastic card for gamers. It's a fantastic card for ray tracing, and you started pushing it towards something called 8K gaming. And the reality is, it's not good at it. Most games will not work that way without DLSS, and even with struggle. Unless you're running very low res with upscaling, you're playing it
Yeah,
at
scaling up from
1440.
1440p. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like it's a misrepresentation, and the thing is it's frustrating because like Gamers Nexus in their review, which they're the performance numbers they're going to be using too because I trust them so much. So again, full credit for them. Go check out their channel, go check out the review from them. But they talk about it saying, well, we were going to review this as a production card because despite the name, it's basically a production card. But then they started advertising it as an 8K gaming card, and this is where good reviewers, in my opinion, do review a product based on what it's advertised. You're advertised to do.
Yeah.
You have a case that's advertised to have good airflow, a PC case, and instead of having good airflow, it looks good, but the airflow is just fucking shit. Then that's a bad case because you're advertising it incorrectly, and so you're misleading people.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Nvidia did the night before the launch of the 3090. Is they misled people to it being an 8K gaming card, which also of course made people think that, oh, it's an amazing 4K gaming card, which like, yeah, it's actually pretty good, but there are games that even at 4K it still can't maintain a full 60. So I don't know, it puts it in a weird place. I don't know if you have anything additional you want to add before we jump into the numbers.
No.
Okay, so I'll just dart into that then. So again, Gamers Nexus numbers, these come directly from the video review. They don't have the article posted yet, but I like to make it very clear that these are not our numbers and that these are their numbers and they get credit for it. I choose their numbers if available because I trust theirs more than anybody else in the industry. So Red Dead Redemption 2, and their review will be in the description too. So if you want to go directly to it, it'll be there. So Red Dead Redemption 2 at 4K on high settings is looking at the 3090 Founders Edition. These are all stock clocks. I'm not going to go over overclocks in any detail, but I do have a note at the end about it. So Red Dead Redemption 2 4K high 3090 got 92.3 FPS. The 3080 got 84.1 FPS, and the 1080 Ti, the EVGA for the Win 3 1080 Ti, which I think is important to note. That's the one that I'm using for pretty much all the benchmarks here for when I say 1080 Ti. Now, the reason that I think that's an important note is because the 10 series did have pretty decent overclocking, and so the for the Win 3 is faster than the Founders at that time. So this is better than like what mine would do, for example. Got 70.9 FPS. So Three Kingdoms 4K Ultra 3090 Founders 54.3 FPS, 3080 was 48 FPS, and the For the Win 3 1080 Ti was 24.5 FPS. Rainbow Six Siege 3090 358, 3080 328, and the 1080 Ti was 187 FPS. And Shadow of the Tomb
more.
Yeah, that was a that's a significant, and I'm explicitly including the 1080 Ti numbers, and I actually, again, I have a note about that too at the end. But okay, so then we also have Shadow of the Tomb Raider 4K high, 3090 was 104 FPS, 3080 was 92, and the 1080 Ti, again the For the Win 3 was, or FTW3, I don't know if they actually claim it as For the Win, but anyway, 50.6. And now I will give you an RTX benchmark as well. Quake 2 RTX 4K with RTX on. 3090 got 39.3 FPS, the 3080 got 34.6 FPS, and the 2080 Ti only got 23.8. 2080 Ti Strix in specific, so it is factory overclocked a bit. And I wanted to compare it to that just because obviously the 10 series didn't do ray tracing, so we can't compare it to that. And so one of the things I want to jump on here is I'm a little bit annoyed because most of the reviews that I've seen have been primarily comparing the card, like, and some of them, like Gamers Next obviously did, but some of them had the graphs with the older cards, but like a lot of reviews didn't even show the 1080 Ti in the graphs when they were talking about it. They showed just the 20 series. And the problem, the annoyance I have there is the demand is so high for these cards this time around because they're a significant jump over Pascal. Not because they're, I mean, they are significant, but not like if you have a 2080 Ti, it wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to upgrade right now. Just wait for things to mature more and stuff like that. Wait for sales. But if you're a Pascal person and you've been waiting to upgrade, this is a fantastic time, and not having the numbers blaring you in the face for the 1080 Ti, I think is kind of irritating because a lot of people looking at these cards are coming from 1080 Ti's. I'm one of them. So I did want to make sure I included those numbers for you guys, and that's what's really impressive here is, you see just these massive leaps from the 1080 Ti. I mean, again, we're talking over a doubling in frames for Shadow of the Tomb Raider between a 1080 Ti and a 3090. And the 3080 is still really impressive. Like, the 3080 is a beast and is a better gaming card, a better value. And I'm waiting for more productivity benchmarks to come into place because there hasn't been a ton of them yet. And I'm waiting for somebody that I trust a lot to do them, which Gamers Nexus is going to have more coming. So we'll probably talk about that in more detail later. But the productivity of this 3090 is really what you're looking at it for. You're paying over double the price over a 3080 for what is, in a lot of cases, only about a 10% uplift in performance. I think the technical average that Digital Foundry put out was like between 8 and 13% was the kind of average range they saw of increase on all the games they tested. Now, obviously, go ahead.
One thing I wanted to add about your point about the 10 series cards being important to see their benchmarks for when looking at upgrade, or for people that are looking at upgrading. The 1080 Ti on Steam's hardware survey, I just looked it up. For August, the 1080 Ti was at 2.5%. The 1080 Ti was at 1.62%, whereas the 2080 Ti is 0.98 and the 2080 is only 1%. So there's a lot more people on 1080 Ti's and 1080s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're older cards. They don't have RTX.
So they're more likely
multiple reasons to need to upgrade.
Yeah.
And so there's a higher percentage of people with more reasons to upgrade. And so it is really important to see that comparison. I just wanted to add those numbers in there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And that's exactly my point is, like the 20 series, all things said and done in terms of sales numbers was a flop. Now, in terms of, the tech and what they were able to do was successful, but it was because of the high price to help pay for that it didn't do very well. And and of course, some might argue that we should talk about like 1070 super, or not super, 1070 and stuff like that. But the thing is, like, if you had a 1070, a lot of times people stay within the same budget class for graphics cards. If you have a 1070, you're probably not looking to upgrade to even a 3080, especially not a 3090, right? You're looking
Yeah.
at waiting for a 3070 when those launch, which we'll of course talk about.
And if
when
you
they
are
launch.
looking at upgrading to a 3080, 3090, then you'd be kind of doing a much different comparison anyway.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a different kind of leap
Yeah.
because it's not just generational. And so these numbers here are obviously really impressive. Like, in fact, I was really impressed with the Quake RTX ones. Is we're seeing the RTX benchmarks. We're looking at like almost a doubling over the 2080 Ti in a lot of instances, which is a big
Mm-hmm.
deal. RTX, like it takes Quake 2 at 4K from unplayable to playable, which is a big deal. And even the 3080 actually does that. 30 FPS being the playable mark. So
Yeah.
that kind of gives you a bit of a rundown of the numbers. But again, it's a productivity card, and you're gonna buy it for, you're gonna buy it for that 24 gigabytes of VRAM. There's mostly no reason to get that, even if you're a 4K gamer. There's very few games that will push 10 gigabytes to its limit. There are some instances where I've heard of that happening, especially if you have other stuff running, if you have a web browser that's sucking some VRAM and stuff open. But if you close everything, 10 gigs should get you through any game at 4K right now. And then obviously the 3080 has a rumored 20 gig card coming for those that may be worried about future usage and on high res displays for gaming. But the 3090 is for productivity, and like that's why I'm trying to get it, and we'll talk a little more about that
Mm-hmm.
here in a moment. But I think one thing that's important to note about, and this is something that Daniel and I have actually been talking about a lot over the last week, is the Titan optimization and driver optimizations that are missing from the 3090.
Yeah, so Linus mentioned this in his video. He was doing some productivity benchmarks, and I forget the specific one, but essentially he noticed that it performed worse than the Titan, despite the fact that when you look at the hardware, it has every reason to perform better than the Titan RTX.
Yeah.
Like there is no hardware reason for it. And so he reached out to Nvidia and they responded and they straight up said that there are driver optimizations for certain software that NVIDIA brought from the Quadro to the Titan, and they have chosen not to bring it to the 3090.
Yeah. So that's an interesting, it brings up a lot of interesting conversation. Of course, the first question that it brings up is there going to be another Titan? And my speculation is no. Now, am I correct to assume that you disagree with that, Daniel?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, I don't think there will be, specifically because the GA102 die is already effectively completely used up. You never get 100% out of a die, and there's only 2 SMs available on it. Or I think it's 2. It might be 4. It's not very many. So chances of them giving you a chip that's gonna be more powerful is really unlikely. And the VRAM, they're not going to be able to address more VRAM with that same die, especially not with PCB design. They already have filled up pretty much all the spots for chips on the board.
Mm-hmm.
However, how come you disagree? That's I think we should talk about that live.
I don't think they're going to so one of the things we mentioned as far as me having an issue with them leaving out the Titan optimizations
Uh-huh.
is there being an even wider um, price gap for those customers that specifically used that software between higher performance GeForce cards and now in this case having to go to Quadro.
Yeah.
And I see no reason why, like realistically, Nvidia could drop, like once they have better yields, they could just drop better binned cards that are slightly clocked better or something, and have a bit of validation that you wouldn't get from GeForce cards, have the optimizations, and then have the full speed GDDR6X RAM because it is not running at full like of its max potential speed. It
Hmm.
can run at 21, I think it is, and it's running at 19 and a half. And then they can just do those few things and probably charge $1,000 more for it. And I don't see them deleting an entire like branding scheme.
Yeah, and so this is where we actually come to agreement. Is I think it would be really dumb for them to leave out the Titan. I think that would be a bad decision,
Mm-hmm.
because they can charge a lot for not much more work. And again, it's that gap that's an issue where like there's this significant price jump to get a similarly performing Quadro versus
Yeah.
the 3090 FE, or just 3090 in general, and that is an issue in and of itself. Is if there's not another Titan, they've kind of killed a segment of market where people are willing to spend a lot but don't necessarily have the money to go buy a $6,000 graphics card, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope there's a Titan. Now the reasoning for me kind of feeling like there isn't is because I feel like from Nvidia's perspective, they may not want to release a Titan that isn't significantly better performing across the board, versus the 3090. And like the increased VRAM is going to help some, but like for gaming, for example, that's going to maybe give it like a 2 or 3% lead.
Well, I think that what they would do is just stop positioning it as a
Gaming card.
gaming and productivity card and just be like, this is the Titan will essentially what I see it as is being the prosumer productivity card.
Yeah,
This is
so
the
like
one
if
you
you're
buy.
doing AI, you're doing heavy duty simulation and machine learning and stuff, but you're doing that yourself, not for a
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
and
you're, it's a card that works well for education. It's
mhm,
a card that works well for um, smaller really small teams, that type of thing.
right.
Um, it has its marketplace essentially. And the last thing they want to do is risk leaving any gap or upsetting customers who might then say, okay, if my option is to go with a 3090, which performs worse in certain tasks, or like if I'm already taking a performance hit, maybe I'll try AMD this time if AMD's graphics cards are better. That's the last thing they need to
Yeah.
take that risk on. And AMD cards are generally always pretty good at compute stuff.
And they're generally open about it. There's not driver lockdowns and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
And so
yeah.
that's the last thing that Nvidia would want to do is risk that market share going to AMD, not because AMD is necessarily actually better, but because Nvidia did something stupid.
Yeah, no, that okay, so that I guess that makes sense. So, and again, I hope there is, because there is a market segment for it. And if they come out with a Titan, it's actually going to be an interesting position, because graphics cards needs are a really wide variance of needs, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of, there's not just the gamer, right? There's the gamer, there's the content creator that does video editing in After Effects, or Resolve Fusion. And then there's people doing machine learning, and we need to address all of these different market segments, right? And so, it's like, for example, if you needed a lot of VRAM, which like I'm one of those people that needs a lot of VRAM, and it was during the 20 series, my option was only a Titan RTX, and I wasn't going to go spend $2,500 when I'm not going to use a lot of what's there.
Mhm.
But there are people that did, because they needed that VRAM to do certain types of work, but they only needed it for the VRAM. They didn't need it for all the other Titan features. And so, if there is a Titan that does come out, Nvidia is actually doing a good job, I think, of kind of filling in every market segment. Where now, if you're that person, where a GeForce style card is fine in terms of the compute for your workload, but you need a lot of VRAM, whether it's because you have a ton of displays, whether it's because you use Firefox completely pulling all of its VRAM limits off, like I do, whether you're doing video production, like I do, you can get a card now that's not going to be stupid expensive, that does have that lot of VRAM, but only the GeForce style computing.
Yeah.
Um,
Another thing that I want to note about the potential of like an Ampere Titan RTX.
yeah,
So for one, um, so there are some rumors from Moore's Law is Dead, who has a pretty accurate track record.
yeah, I really
Um,
like his stuff.
from earlier this month of essentially indicating Micron is coming out with even faster GDDR6X memory that'll be available in Q1 2021. That's 23
Oh,
gigabits per second. And according to him, Nvidia is looking at doing either a 24 or a 48 gigabyte Titan RTX.
okay, interesting. So 48 would be tough, but I mean, we don't know enough to know for sure that the die can't address that. My concern is PCB space.
Yeah, well,
Because
this
if
is also expected to cost a lot more, like more than the previous gen Titan RTX.
it's like $3,000 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they would have to have a different style PCB, but I mean, I guess it's possible. So I mean, again, though, that positions the Titan in a really good slot in the marketplace for specific use cases, and I think from a business perspective, that's really intelligent because then they're willing to trying to think of the best way to explain it. They're like, exactly what you need from Nvidia. You don't,
Hmm.
if they do put the Titan in place, right, you don't have to think as much about what you're willing to compromise and potentially giving them less money or buying an AMD card. It's, oh, I'm a budget gamer, I go with X card, the 17 series or whatever it'll be. I'm a mid-range gamer, you get a 3070, a 3080. You're a high-end gamer, maybe go all the way for a 3090 or a TI that's high clocked if they come out with that later or something. Or you're doing video production, content creation, you go with a 3090. You do machine learning and stuff, you go up to the Titan, and then if you're a business, you go with Quadros. And so that I like that. I actually like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, and then something to note. So with the 23 gigabits per second GDDR6X,
Yeah.
and it being rumored to use a 352-bit memory bus, it would come in at a whopping 1 terabyte a second memory bandwidth.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Wow. Um so I think that pretty much covers the 3090 in terms of its numbers and some of the changes, but we want to talk about the orders here too, and me in particular. This is where you're gonna see me cry a lot on stream. So so I keep calling it stream, but this is like a day later. Anyway, so the order process was disgusting. Now we already know the order process for the 3080s was pretty bad. We talked about it in the last podcast, I think. It was really, really hard to get them. They sold out in seconds. Some sites showed them sold out instantly. Some places never got them. And Nvidia has actually apologized for that, saying that bots got a lot of them, and they basically went over a lot of the answers, which I think we did talk about that in last podcast too. I think we went over the response.
I think so.
Yeah. Or no, this came out on the 21st, so no, we wouldn't have, but we did talk about it. And what it is they gave a lot of hope to 3090 users with this post, I feel like. So they did apologize. They said there's not a lot of stock. They said demand's bigger than they expected. They said there were a lot of bots and scalpers and scripts that they have done a lot of work to prevent, and kind of indicating the 3090 launch might be better. You might be able to actually get one if you're there right at the time of launch, refreshing the page, trying to get one. Their site didn't crash even with the 3080 launch, but you weren't able to get them because they sold out the second that the store was refreshed, which really sucked. So now to just jump into, well, I guess, Daniel, should we touch on the capacitor issue for the 3080s and maybe that affected stock?
I mean, yeah.
I think we should go ahead and do
It
that.
wouldn't have affected the Founder Edition stock, but yeah.
Yeah. So it wouldn't have affected the Founders Edition, but what it is there was an issue with the capacitors on the backside of the 3080 GPUs that are causing the crashing. And this is something I think we should maybe address really quick, because there's been a lot of reports of 3080s crashing, and those were specifically not FE cards is what people were noticing. It seemed like it was only the add-in board partner cards. And as far as we can tell, and this was Igor's lab did a really good content piece on this. In fact, I'll make sure to put a link of that in the description. So That way you guys can actually go check it out and see what it was all about. But anyway, it looks like the issue, what may have happened here, is the add-on board partners were trying to cheap out and go lower than spec on the capacitors on the backside of the GPU, which was causing interference with the GPU at its maximum clock speeds and with GPU boost. And so that was causing crashing. And the reason that it was intermittently noticed is because A, some chips are just more sensitive than others, but B, that, you know, if you're already running at pretty high temperatures, GPU boost doesn't push things as high. So if you're air cooled in a, you know, a non-AC'd room, then you probably wouldn't have had this issue because the clocks aren't being pushed as high. But if you had water cooling, then you would start to see these kinds of crashes.
Yeah, and I think it should be noted too, like, even being below spec with this should be fine. The issue here is that these cards are boosting above the boost spec.
Right. So
Like,
that's
they
also
have their like max boost clock.
they have their own
all of
boost,
these
yeah.
cards are going above that, and they're going too high for what the components can handle.
Yeah, and so the add-on board companies are to blame here more than Nvidia, unless Nvidia gave bad specs and said that, you know, those capacitor. Well, as far as we can tell, though, according to like the Igor's lab report, the spec of it should be 1 high-quality capacitor and 5 of the cheaper ones on the backside. Should be enough to prevent that kind of interference from being an issue. So that actually may have prevented a lot of 3080s from ever going in stock, because there are some companies, EVGA being one of them, that noticed this as an issue ahead of time and didn't ship out any cards with the 6 of the cheaper POS caps, right? And so like those cards were never available for sale, even though they had some manufactured. And so that right there is going to make things more difficult to in terms of, you know, keeping stock and stuff. So I wanted to make sure to mention that, is that some places are going to be fixing that. Now, if you already have a card that has the 6 post caps and it's crashing, what's going to happen is your card's going to be gimped a little bit. The boost clocks are going to be lowered. No, that is not, you know, I mean, it sucks, but that is not by any means false advertising or illegal or anything, because the clocks are what the clocks are in terms of the base clock for the GPU. And as long as it's hitting that base clock, which all of them are, without crashing, then it's not false advertising. You know, what you're getting is an additional performance boost on top of the technical specifications of the card.
Yeah. And if you are having issues with this, one thing to do in the short term is try just dropping your core clock slightly.
Yeah, or even your power limit can work too. Drop like 5% off your power limit.
Some people have been saying dropping their core clock by like 50 resolves the issue completely.
Yeah. I mean, you know, GPUs are incredibly sensitive, and when we're talking at the very peak of the peak is when this is happening. You know, it's you know, potentially a 25 megahertz underclock might be enough, where you're basically not going to notice it in game. You know, so that's the good news. And when they release the BIOS updates, you know, which most companies will probably choose to go that direction instead of doing a recall or something like that. You know, you hopefully will hardly even notice a performance reduction. So that's the good news, I guess, about it.
Yeah, and like for reference, so like the 3080, what's the default boost clock on that?
I think it's 1710.
Yeah, it's 1710, and you have some cards going up.
You have some getting like close to that 2 gigahertz range.
Well, so you have some that are advertised, like the ROG Strix, for example, is advertised as boosting up to 1935. But then you have people online saying that like the Gigabyte OC has gone over 2 gigahertz. The Asus TUF has, like, this guy's only crashes when its boost pushes it above 2100 megahertz.
Yeah.
So it's like these cards are going
well above.
It seems like not just are the companies setting their boost clocks too high, but like, let me look up the Asus TUF 3080, but I bet you it's going above the 3080's own, or the TUF 3080's own boost spec.
You know, it might be. It's hard to find info on like the TUF right now. I'm actually looking for it myself. I don't know if Newegg is actually showing the clock speeds though.
Oh, I'm just going on Asus's website.
Oh yeah, so the boost OC that Newegg has listed is 1740 for the 3080 TUF.
Yeah, that's what Asus's own website lists as well.
Yeah, and the TUF is one of the ones that has the 6 POS caps.
Yeah, and so it's got the 6 POS caps. Its advertised boost is 1740, and some people are seeing it boost to 2100. No wonder it's crashing.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so
I
it's like
bet you
they're
if its boost stayed at I bet you if its boost stayed at 1940, 200 above, it would probably never crash.
yeah, no, it's true. And so that's why just dialing that clock back a little bit is fine. Like just dial it back a little and then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So people are making a bigger deal out of it than they should be, honestly. It sucks, it's frustrating, it's not good for the consumer. But also if the fix is as simple as, oh, I bought this card, either update the VBIOS or, maybe even Nvidia can do a driver update. I'm not sure how much Nvidia has control over like understanding which AIB card you have in their drivers, but they might even be able to patch it themselves, be like, oh, you have, the tough version, we're gonna clock you back 50 megahertz, and then it fixes it. It's not really enough of an issue, I think, for people to be mad in terms of like you won't notice the performance basically at all once you lower that clock just a little bit. So to jump over to the 3090 launch, I am personally disappointed that I didn't get one, but I didn't expect to get one. I expected it to be really hard to get one. But I'm actually angry, and this amplifies my disappointment because of how bad the launch was. Not because of how few were available even, but I was on Nvidia's site, and I also had Newegg and B&H Photo and Best Buy and Amazon and EVGA, all the sites open, ready to purchase one, but I wanted the Founders Edition. So at about 5:58 a.m. was when I was going to start, and this is Pacific time. It was launching at 6 a.m. Pacific time. At 5:58 a.m. is when I decided, okay, I'm going to start refreshing the page just to make sure that, if their clock's off a little bit, a couple seconds, I don't miss it. I can refresh the page and get the card. And I was watching my time. My time both on my Mac and my Windows PC were synced up with global time correctly. So I had checked that because I cared this much about trying to get one. I was going to do everything I could to make sure I got one. So as far as making sure that global time was synced and stuff. And at 5:58 a.m. when I started refreshing, Nvidia said out of stock. And that's when I got mad. And then I refreshed everywhere else. EVGA's site crashed. Best Buy's search stopped working. All of Newegg crashed. Somehow B&H Photo didn't crash, which surprised me. But none of them had them in stock. I almost managed to nab an EVGA one, but then it was out of stock. And there was also a couple of Best Buy ones that showed in stock, but when you tried to add them to cart, it said failed. That was because their site was overloaded and broken. Now, all those ones, those were the kind of behaviors that I expected. But from Nvidia themselves, the site loaded perfectly, by the way. There was no delay in loading, even though it was being hit by a massive amount of traffic. But the fact that it sold out 2 minutes before, or maybe it was more like a minute and a half or a minute and a quarter before the actual launch time, that's when I start to get mad. I'm sorry, but if you're doing this kind of launch, you need to make sure that your time servers and stuff are synced up correctly in Nvidia. And unless something is wrong with the time servers that I use, which I use time.microsoft.com for my Windows PC, I don't recall exactly what I use for Mac, but it's different. It's not that same time server. So unless both of those were wrong, because they were only a variance of about a half second from each other. Again, I checked this. Like, I really wanted to get one. NVIDIA launched it early. So all things set aside, I'm pissed off because NVIDIA launched it early. And there should have been better control over that. I didn't even, like I said, if I had refreshed the page and it was in stock and I added it to cart and it didn't add to cart, or I went to order it and it showed out of stock before I could finish entering my credit card info, like, even though I think adding to cart should freeze that stock number, basically, I wouldn't have been mad. But the fact that I refreshed the site and it showed out of stock immediately was really frustrating. I also had a weird issue where it showed USD for the site when I refreshed it, but then I refreshed it a couple more times and it directed me to NVIDIA's UK site, which made me wonder if they were doing some kind of load balancing. And so it started showing pounds instead of dollars. But again, on both of this was after it already showed out of stock. I was still on the US site when it showed out of stock. So I don't know what the heck was going on there, but that was really frustrating for me to not even have a chance to click the button. Like, I expected to at least be able to click the add to cart button, right? And just have it fail. But have that satisfaction of, okay, everybody else beat me to it by just a little bit, or has a slightly faster connection, is slightly closer to the server, fine. So that was just a shit show. And it's disappointing because it's been really, really hard to get them. I've gotten an email from Amazon once or twice that they had it in stock, but obviously by the time you get the email, they're probably out of stock. and they were, I even pulled over when I was driving to try and order one.
Yeah.
So it's just frustrating to me. I find it kind of unacceptable to have a launch that bad, but that seems to be the tradition this year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's been crazy.
it's unfortunate, but you guys will have 3090 content coming to you soon from us. I have a few interesting things that I want to try and go over on it that may be a little more unique than what the mainstream reviewers are doing, which is what I try to do because I wouldn't trust my numbers over Gamers Nexus. So if you're interested in the numbers, just jump over to them and see what it performs like. But I'm excited to do it. It's going to be getting water cooled at some point too, towards the end of the year. That'll be a fun project to show you guys. So, but I think at this point, that's enough complaining about the horrible launch. We can go ahead and jump into the Nvidia ending SLI support on a driver level. So this also makes me cry. I am a multi-GPU fan. I have two 1080 Ti's in here right now, not in SLI mode actually, because I use DaVinci Resolve for rendering, and it cannot address both GPUs when they're in SLI configuration. As far as I know, I haven't really been able to find a lot of research on that, unfortunately, but I know at least last year, DaVinci Resolve definitely couldn't. They may have fixed that more recently, but I'm a multi-GPU fan. I have used SLI in games a lot in the past. I used to have these cards in SLI. And for me, it's just sad to see it ending on a driver level, but I don't necessarily think this is the, what did Luke call it from Linus Tech Tips? The final nail in the coffin, I think is what he said specifically. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that this is just a new direction for multi-GPU, and we might actually see improvements. So Nvidia specifically has said that they are not putting out any more driver profiles starting in 2021 for SLI optimizations for cards. However, they have said, and I quote, "Instead, we will focus efforts on supporting developers to implement SLI natively inside the games." Now, the reason for that is because of lower level APIs being used more widely. And so I think Nvidia might not necessarily be like, rip SLI here, but might more so be like, we don't need to worry about supporting SLI directly, because with these lower level APIs, if we can work with the developers directly to try and have them implemented on an API level, you actually get better performance. You get better multi-GPU support. You get explicit multi-GPU support in many cases where you don't need a bridge. You just have two GPUs and they just work. Or
here's the other thing too. If Nvidia is going to be working with the developers on SLI, that means they're going to probably work with developers on other Nvidia optimization, and we're going to have more games that are optimized for Nvidia GPUs instead of AMD GPUs is probably their goal.
That's actually a good point too. Yeah. In fact, that's a good branding thing from their point, from a business perspective. You can take two 3090s and get another 80% or 90% performance improvement if you have a CPU fast enough, of course, and do like actual 8K gaming across the board. That's a great branding perspective for them over AMD. So I could see that being one of the reasons for it, actually. That's a good point. And I think it's just easier if they work with the developers to get this implemented, because the lower level APIs, from my understanding, not a game developer, but from my understanding, it is actually easier to do multi-GPU with the lower level APIs doing it directly in game than it is to do it on a driver level. It's like easier in terms of it takes less work. And so this might be a new beginning for multi-GPU, actually, which is what I hope. And, I would personally love to see the eventual hopeful reality that I've been talking about for 4 or 6 years now, of being able to put any GPUs you want in your system and utilizing them to their fullest extent correctly, or to some extent, where if the API and DX12 and Vulkan are fully capable of this, it's just a matter of, actually developing for it. You have a 1060 and a 3090, and the 1060 can have certain things offloaded to it that the 3090 doesn't have to work on then, and give you an overall better experience. But that's a long hopeful goal.
Good luck with that.
yes, but at least being able to have like two 3090s or something like that, with the NVLink bridge still being a possibility. Like, don't get me wrong, explicit multi-GPU doesn't mean that like the low level APIs don't mean that they can't use the bridge. That will still probably be a benefit in a lot of scenarios. And then the bridge and NVLink in general also supports the ability to do memory pooling. This has been true since the 20 series as well, where you can actually, the common misconception of, oh, I have two 1080 Ti, so I have 22 gigabytes of VRAM, right? No, you have 11 usable because each card has to be mirrored. With NVLink, if it's implemented right on a program level, and there are some that do it, you would be able to have two 3090s and actually have 48 gigabytes total usable memory, because that link is so fast that the GPU could just access the memory in the other GPU. It doesn't have to mirror it.
Yeah.
So we could see some improvements, and I hope, like, DaVinci Resolve being the leader when it comes to optimization on a video editing front, maybe eventually implements that sort of thing, and then gives me an excuse to buy another 3090. But at the
Let's
same
be real,
time,
you don't need an excuse. You want
you're
an excuse.
yeah, you're probably right. But I don't know. I mean, in my setup, having an extra PCIe slot for other things might be really useful, as well as having more space for the second system that's in here to potentially, like, water cool that. There's some ups and downs. So, but yes, eventually we will have 3090 content coming for you guys. I'm very excited to bring some of that in and talk about the experience with it. I'm stoked. So keep an eye out for that.